they're really dehydrated. We have to do IVs. You know, this is not working. Like, you need to do something. So we did end up giving them a bottle with my frozen milk. And he told me, he's like, you know, why do you want to breastfeed them? You know, and I'm like, well, because it's what's better. It's cheaper. And, you know, that's what I did for my other kids. Like, I want to give them the same experience that I did for my other children. And he told me, he's like, well, I've never seen a woman breastfeed triplets. There's no way that you can possibly make enough milk.
Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. You have already noticed that the All About Breastfeeding show is not like others that you listen to. There are times when the sound quality may not be as good as I would like it to be. There are times when you might hear babies cry or other noises of households in the background. Of course, I aim to provide you with a professional show with great audio and a host, that would be me, who is on her game all the time. That is what I aim to do. And then there is real life that gets in the way. After all, I am interviewing mothers who have babies. The plan is for the babies to sleep during the interview or to have another adult care for them while the interview is happening. And yet we all know that saying, the best laid plans. If you are one of my fabulous listeners who have never been pregnant or are pregnant for the first time, you may not fully get the difficulties it is for mothers to always time things just right. The biggest problem is the unknown factor. And the unknown factor in this equation is the baby. They are not always predictable. You will learn that soon enough, and you will see that your day may not always go as planned. If you are already a mom, you know exactly what I'm talking about. As the host of this show, I roll with it. Having birthed 3 babies within a 5-year period, I know all too well that the life of a mom means constant adjusting as the day goes on. You do your best to get things done that you planned, and then there is also an acceptance that you need to adopt that things often don't go as planned. I learned to roll with the lifestyle as a mother of young children, and I adopt the same lifestyle to my podcast. Why am I explaining this to you now? Well, today you will meet an incredible mother of 5 children. She is so fabulous and so committed to sharing her story and for keeping her commitment to this show that when her kids did not go to sleep as planned, she did the next best thing she could do, and I applaud her for doing so. Always thinking on her feet, Brittany dressed 5 young children up for the cold Ohio weather, put them in the car, and figured she would drive around while she conducted the interview with me and hoped that they would just fall asleep. All the noise in the background of the car, the motor, the street noise, the kids will quickly let you know they did not go to sleep during the interview. So, Brittany does the next best thing and drives to her grandmother's house where she drops off the kids and then goes back into the car to finish this interview. That is dedication, Brittany, and I thank you for it. I applaud Brittany for keeping her commitment to do this interview, and once you hear her story, you will see why I admire Brittany and easily accept the imperfections of this perfect interview. One of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast is because I have such a burning desire for mothers to share their stories as it happened to them, for it to be real and no sugarcoating, raw emotions and the truth. Mothers spend way too much time thinking they are doing something wrong, or something is wrong with them, or their baby, or their lifestyle. They batter themselves emotionally because from the outside looking in, it often looks like every other mom has the perfect life, where everything goes just as it should. And this is so far from the truth. It is in the imperfection of the daily life that you begin to realize that your mommy life is perfectly perfect for you. I admire Brittany's strength, her tenacity, her love of mothers and babies, and her dedication to educate and speak the truth. If her story resonates with you, feel free to go to aabreastfeeding.biz/contact and leave a note. Remember, once you get through the first 10 minutes of some noise, you will find listening much easier, and I know you're going to enjoy hearing insights from Brittany, a mom who is breastfeeding her triplets. Let's get started. Today, I would love to welcome my guest, Brittany Yankowski. She is a mother of 5 children and a photographer. She has a newly 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old triplets. She breastfed all her kids, and they each had their own struggles and achievements. Brittany is now driving around in her car with her kids, so we might hear a lot of background stuff. We might hear noises from the kids, but with a mom of 5 kids, to be driving them around, I think she's doing pretty good, and hopefully some or all might fall asleep, but we're just going to do the best that we can, right, Brittany?
Yep, hopefully.
Okay, so welcome to the show. So tell us where you are and what you're doing right now.
Well, it's nap time, and my kids decided that they didn't want to take a nap today. So we loaded ourselves up in the car in this beautiful Cleveland snowy weather, and hopefully they'll fall asleep quickly.
Okay, well, we will talk as much as they will allow us, and certainly if you need to answer something or give them something while you're driving around, just go ahead and do so, okay?
Thank you.
So I'm thrilled that you were able to take the time to hang out with me and all of our breastfeeding listeners and get to know you a little better. So I would love for you to start by telling us just a little background information about the family that you grew up in and what life was like for you.
Well, my parents got divorced when I was really young. I was pretty much with my mom, and I'd go visit my dad on the weekends, but I guess I was sort of raised as an only child. So it's sort of funny that I have so many children because it was just me growing up, and they did have other children with their new spouses, but my brother and my sister are actually both 6 years younger than me, just different parents. I didn't see them a whole lot, so it kind of was like they were my siblings, but not, if that makes sense.
So did your mother have a child with someone else, then your father had a child with someone else, and those are your 2 siblings?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So did you grow up in Ohio?
Yep, I did. I was born and raised here, and my husband and I have tried to get out several times, but we still end up back here. So
Trying to get out, you mean like trying to find a job somewhere else so you can escape the Ohio winter?
Yes. We lived in North Carolina for about 7 months, and then my husband's job just fell through. And then we moved to Tennessee for maybe 5 or 6 months, and his job fell through there. So both times we decided to come back to Ohio, and I don't think we'll ever leave because it's comfy here. So cold but comfy.
And you have family there?
Yeah, all of my family is right here in Cleveland, and my husband's family lives in Columbus.
Yeah, and probably now that you have a very growing family, you recognize the importance of being around family. Perhaps they can help you during times when you really need it, right?
Yes, it's so nice to have built-in babysitters that, I can trust, and I know they're going to take care of my kids because, they're family, so.
Exactly. So tell me about what you thought that you might be, when you were a young girl, what you thought you might be doing as an adult, and how does that compare to what your life is like now?
Well, what's really funny is one time when we were moving, my mom found a journal that I had made. So every year in school, we would write, like what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I always wanted, like typical kid stuff, like a teacher, an actress. But every time I'd always put, and a mom. So my mom always joked when I was a kid that I just was destined to be a mom. Here I am. I have 5 kids. I guess it kind of turned out how I expected. I just didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah. So you were already writing it in journals, but one never knows how it's going to pan out.
Yeah, and when I was a teenager, I never envisioned myself having, I guess, this many children. I always kind of thought, 2 or 3. So when my husband and I had 2 kids, and then, we're like, okay, let's have one more. And then it was triplets. I guess we didn't have too much say in the matter, but we're very lucky and very blessed.
And then all of a sudden in 5 years, you have 5 kids, right?
Yeah, actually, when the triplets were born, my oldest was 3.5. So for about 6 months, we had 5 children, 3 and under.
Wow. And you wanted that badge of honor, right?
No, I just wanted to survive.
In survival mode, you're right.
Yes.
I was definitely in survival mode, but I would say that I want that badge of honor. So if someone were to see me or my kids having a meltdown, my response was always like, listen, I have 3 kids under 5, so I'm doing okay. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about breastfeeding Natalie, and then we'll go on from there.
Okay. Well, she, as you know, she was my first, and I was 20 years old when I had her. I was not breastfed when I was a baby. So it was sort of something that I had read about through being pregnant, and, my family wasn't really supportive, but everything I read, I just knew I had to do that. I had to try. So when she came, we tried, and it was really, really tough at first. It was really painful. She had a really poor latch. I had supply problems, and at that time, I didn't know who to reach out to for help. So we fought, and, after probably 6 or 8 weeks, it got better, and I'm like, okay, we can do this. And, and then around 9 months, she started, crawling and trying to walk, and, all those struggles that I felt like I had in the very beginning sort of resurfaced because, she no longer wanted to nurse, and, she started having latch problems, like a lazy latch, and fought it out, but I didn't know how to pump. I didn't know who to ask. There were so little resources available to me that I ended up just kind of giving up. And it was sort of, it was devastating, but at the same time, I was like, okay, well, we made it 9 months. That's good. That's better than, most, the average that you read everywhere. And, it was really hard for me to accept, I felt like I failed, and I feel like that's a really, I hear that from other moms so often, and I'm just like, I know, I was there, the beginning was hard. And then once you overcome, all the struggles you had, you just feel on top of the world, and then just have that end so suddenly. And you just it's like, oh no, what happened? We were doing so well, so it was brief. It was my shortest experience breastfeeding with any of my kids. But, it taught me so much. I feel like I experienced every bad thing that you could during that first time breastfeeding.
Is there anything that you did between that time breastfeeding Natalie and becoming pregnant again and planning on breastfeeding your next baby?
No, I don't think I really did anything per se. I had been gifted a pump when I had her, and I never really knew how to use it, and I always sort of felt that because I didn't pump, maybe that's what went wrong. So, when I found out that I was pregnant with my second, I was determined, okay, I've done this once before, I knew the problems that I had, I knew what I did to overcome them, and pumping was really the big thing that I wanted to learn about. So I spent, a lot of time kind of looking for resources on Facebook and online, and just trying to find something that, somebody that could kind of help me and teach me, when do I pump, how long do I pump, so that way I could, I didn't want my first experience that didn't end the best way to deter me from breastfeeding my next one. I'm like, okay, well, this is my second chance, I'm gonna learn from it, I'm gonna, this time's gonna be even better. It was having those difficulties in the beginning, I guess, sort of paved the road for the next time, so that I knew where to go and what to do.
Right.
Looking for more resources. I felt like that was such a huge thing, was, somebody to help me out when I needed it and I didn't know what to do.
So what did you find that became a valuable resource for you the second time?
Lactation consultants.
Oh, great.
I never... I knew that they were there at the hospital, but I didn't think at 6 months or, whenever she, was on a feeding strike that, who do you call? Okay, well, you call a lactation consultant. And I didn't know that the first time, So that when the second time came around, it was like, oh, she doesn't want to eat. Okay, let me call my lactation consultant. Here's what's going on. And then they always kind of said, okay, well, maybe it's teeth, maybe it's that, try this, and having somebody to, sometimes it just takes a second person to be like, okay, well, maybe it's this and you should try this. Sometimes, okay, I knew that, but, like having someone else say it kind of verified, like, okay, yeah, try that. Especially when it's a professional who knows what they're doing when I didn't.
Sometimes you're just so in the thick of it that I think like I call it just a fresh pair of eyes and ears, listening to what's going on and supporting what it is you're trying to do, and maybe just giving you some fresh ideas that you hadn't thought about yet.
Right, exactly.
But you do bring up a couple of very good points in that sometimes mothers, they do have a good breastfeeding experience, or they have a hard start, they get going, and then at a certain point, many months later, they have some difficulty that we really want to be able to support the breastfeeding mother throughout the whole time she's breastfeeding, and that it's not so uncommon to have bumps along the road that you might be looking and calling for a lactation consultant to help you, not just in the very early weeks.
Right, and that support the entire time that you're breastfeeding, I feel that's so crucial, and I don't think a lot of women know that it's there. And even if it's not a lactation consultant, even just, if it's somebody that's done it before, like you said, the fresh pair of ears and eyes it's such a big thing.
So tell us about how old are your triplets?
They are 16 months now.
And what are their names?
They're our baby A, she's Addison, and then our baby B is Bentley, and baby C is Connor.
Okay, so they're 16 months old. So I wanted you to tell us about the very early days with breastfeeding your triplets.
When I decided to breastfeed them, I was so determined, and it was really, really hard. It was probably my hardest start. My milk took a lot longer to come in with them, and I don't know why, but it took a lot longer to come in. So when they were first born, it's a lot nursing one. So when you're nursing three, it sort of feels like that's all you do. I was really eager to learn how to tandem nurse because the idea of feeding two at once and then only having the third and freeing up some extra time was really appealing. But it's just when you have a baby on a 2-hour schedule, and one baby takes a half an hour, and then the second baby takes a half an hour, and then the third baby takes a half an hour, right there's an hour and a half, and then you basically have give or take a half an hour to eat, shower, do what you need to do.
I like the fact that with 5 kids now and brand new triplets that you even actually were able to say the words free time.
The first couple weeks were such a struggle. I want to, just because I had triplets, I still wanted to sort of parent them the same way that I had my first 2 singletons. But it was really hard to figure out, okay, how do I do this, but then balance, time with my older 2 children and still find time to eat and shower and take care of myself, because, as new moms, we always seem to just forget that we matter. By, the time the triplets came, I knew that was important. So how do you sleep? How do you shower, eat? And then I still had 2 other children who needed me, they were 1 and 3 at the time. So that was really, really difficult. And I think that learning how to tandem nurse, and kind of gaining that extra half hour was, it was, it doesn't seem like a lot to some people, but for me, it was really crucial and it was really important. It really did help sort of my sanity and my, and it kind of helped my kids keep going.
So for pregnant moms who are not breastfed yet, can you tell us a little bit about what tandem nursing is?
Yes, tandem nursing is essentially nursing 2 babies at once. So one baby gets one breast, the other baby gets the other breast. I know a lot of moms who, are expecting twins or multiples. They're terrified by it, and I was terrified. I was excited, but I was terrified. And especially when you're kind of you're sitting there, you've got one baby, and then you kind of have to maneuver and ninja moves to kind of get the other baby. It can be difficult, but then once you get the hang of it, you're like, oh, okay, this is great. Why didn't I do this sooner?
And how did you figure out did you assign a baby a breast, or how did you go about that?
In the beginning, I would just kind of, whoever cried first, I try to make a mental note, so, say baby A goes on the left side, baby B goes on the right side. Then, when they were done, baby C would, I would offer both breasts. So then the next time, usually the baby that ate last was the first wanting to eat. That didn't always happen. But, I always tried to rotate, whoever ate last was always offered, the first, the next feeding. I was pretty good about it for probably the first 3 weeks. The first week, of course, still being in the hospital. So they had the nice little charts and that was easier. And then once we got home, I kept up with it for about another 2 weeks. After that, it just, if you were crying, you got to eat. We went weekly. I'm very lucky. My lactation consultant, her daughter actually had triplets. So she was pretty knowledgeable on breastfeeding multiples, and she runs a breastfeeding support group 3 times a week locally to us. So we would go weekly and do weight checks, and, we would do transfer weights where we would weigh the babies, and then I would feed them, and then we would weigh them afterwards to see how much they were getting. A couple times we did have foremilk, hind milk imbalance. And that was pretty easy to catch when their poop turns green. So at that point, I would just, try to make sure that whichever baby was having, the imbalance, I'd try to make sure that, they got to eat first. Or, I'd like to say that I had a system and I did it first, but then it just became too much. And it was like, oh, you're crying? Okay, come here, let's feed you. And,
But then whatever system you didn't have seemed to work out. You just kind of figured it out. And it sounds like you were paying attention to your baby's cues rather than writing down and recording who had what when.
Exactly. Sometimes, okay, all 3 of them would be fed, but then one would wake up and want to eat. And I know, the instinct from, is like, oh, well, you just ate, you're not hungry again. But for me, it was like, okay, yeah, you're crying, here. I don't know what's left in there, but whatever's left is all yours. Whoever was hungry, I figured sometime one would eat more, and then the next feeding, they weren't hungry until later, and the one thing that I did do was, I tried doing completely on demand with all 3, and I went nuts. It was just, I felt like I never got to do anything. So my system was, if one's crying, then all 3 are going to eat, even in the middle of the night. So if one would wake up, then I would grab another one and, they would eat. And that was sort of the only system. It was sort of on demand, but not, it was led by whoever cried first. But that way they all ate at the same time. And then I still had a little bit of time after they ate to kind of focus on, whatever I needed to do, my other kids eating, things of that nature.
So you're doing the weekly weight checks, which helps to give you the confidence that they're getting enough milk, right?
Yeah, and it was partly for my own, reassurance, because with my second, I had more than enough milk. I could have fed, I could have fed 1 million babies. It was crazy. But with my first, I didn't have that. And so it was sort of, when it came to the triplets, there's always that worry, are you making enough? And, I try to tell myself, okay, well, I'm nursing on demand. I'm pumping when I can. They're not they're healthy. Imagine if they weren't, if they were starving, that they would be crying, uncontrollably. But it was a reassurance. And it was also, when they were first born, I had a lot of doctors tell me, you can't do it. So it almost put a fear in me that oh, I have to monitor this, because if they try to tell me oh, I told you couldn't do it, I didn't want somebody coming after me saying, oh, well, you're not feeding your baby. I needed that proof, I guess, to say, yes, I go meet with a lactation consultant every week, and every week they transfer well and they're gaining weight. And so your opinion doesn't matter, because you said I couldn't do it, and I'm doing it.
You internally probably felt like it. Yeah, you have some doubts, and it would be normal to have that, but you're figuring, I made a lot of milk with my second baby. More than likely, I'll make a lot of milk, but it sounds like you had some concerns, and for your own personal needs, but also to be able to chart and prove to the naysayers
right.
that you had plenty of milk and your babies were gaining. So I'm curious, the people who said that you couldn't, was it they saying you couldn't physically breastfeed babies? It would be too much work? Were they saying you couldn't possibly make enough milk for your babies? Were your babies born a little early and of a smaller weight and they were saying you couldn't do it? What were some of the reasons you were told why you would not be able to breastfeed your triplets?
Well, when they were first born, my milk took a little bit to come in. And so I was still nursing my second when I got pregnant with the triplets. So I had pumped and stored milk in preparation that just in case I needed it, it was there. So they actually, I fought pretty hard in the hospital. Like, they're not getting formula. I'm going to breastfeed them. If I have to sit here in this bed and there's a baby attached to me 24/7, I'm doing this. So then they got moved to the NICU because initially I was told that they weren't gaining weight. Then they told me that they were having temperature problems. Then once we got there, we went back to they're not gaining weight. So I had a doctor come in and, he said, look, they're really dehydrated. We have to do IVs. This is not working. Like, you need to do something. So we did end up giving them a bottle with my frozen milk. And he told me, he's like, why do you want to breastfeed them? And I'm like, well, because it's what's better. It's cheaper. And that's what I did for my other kids. Like, I want to give them the same experience that I did for my other children. And he's like, well, I've never seen a woman breastfeed triplets. There's no way that you can possibly make enough milk.
Was this a pediatrician?
Yes, this was a neonatologist. He was an older gentleman. It was very attacking to hear from a neonatologist who, I'm at one of the best hospitals in the country, and they get donor milk from donor banks for preemies. And, and I don't know. I sort of felt like because they were triplets, they had zero confidence that I could do it. And by the time they were discharged, I was pumping and bottle feeding initially, more so to please them than anything else, because in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I need to get them gaining weight. I need to get out of here because they're not going to let me do what I need to do for my babies. So I just kind of did whatever they wanted me to do. And we went home and, at that point I was pumping more than they were even taking. So I started, I did start storing some. And, after a week, I said, you know what, they're gaining weight, they're doing fine, let's just go back to breast. And that's what we did. We got rid of the bottles, and I just started putting them back to breast. And, we did what we had to do. And I still, sometimes I would love to go back to the hospital and just show them my babies and say, this is what breastfed triplets look like. Just to
Boy, I wish
he was wrong.
Yes, I definitely think you should. I know your life is very busy, but at some point it would be nice if you did. It would be great if you could do that, like on their year birthday, if you could have done that.
Yeah.
But, every day is still another opportunity to, or at least to send them pictures.
We were so lucky. I had such amazing support, prenatally. And so I felt very attacked in that situation. And, I feel like even though they were triplets, sometimes I wondered, does that happen to moms who only have one baby? Is that why? Are they getting enough support if they really want to breastfeed, are they getting the support that they need? Because that was important to me and I wasn't receiving the support that I needed.
In the hospital, when you had the triplets, was there any lactation consultants on staff who were able to help you?
Yes. Well, when they were initially born, the pediatrician that came in had a lactation consultant basically supervising every single feed with them. At that point, they were still losing weight. They weren't gaining, and they wanted to see what was going on. And all the lactation, they were very helpful. They showed me how to tandem. They all said, she's doing great. She's done this before. Everything looks good. And I think the issue there was just that it took longer for my milk to come in. And so I think that they ended up losing between 10 to 14% of their body weight. And I think because they were already smaller, that's what really freaked out the doctors. But my older singletons lost about 10% of their body weight, when they were first born, which is normal for a breastfed baby. But, I think because the triplets are so much smaller, it just sort of freaked them out more. So they were on high alert.
What was their birth weight?
The triplets were born September 2nd of 2014.
And what did they each weigh?
Addison was our smallest, and we were induced because of her. She was 4 pounds, 12 ounces, and she had started to stop growing while, in utero. And so they induced me for her. And then baby B, he was 5 pounds, 6 ounces. And
Wow.
baby C was 5 pounds, 5 ounces.
Wow. At how many weeks were you induced?
35. At 34, they said, okay, it's time to come out. And I said, can we wait a week? Because at 35 weeks, we're not going to be forced to go to NICU. So if we could just wait a week, that would be great. And, you know, my doctors agreed. I was lucky. They agreed to let me try a natural delivery in the first place. So then they, in turn, agreed that, you know, yeah, that's fine. We'll wait a week, you know. So I was really lucky and really blessed with my prenatal care.
So did you have a vaginal birth?
I did. I sure did.
Oh, man, everything about your story is like so fabulous. You fought hard for everything, I bet.
Yeah. And we met with, you know, one doctor who said, you're having a C-section at 34 weeks, period, end of story. And nope, I wasn't accepting that answer. So we found another doctor and he said, you know, if the stars align. And I said, okay, you know, we'll see. I said, I can do it. So at 34 weeks, baby A was head down, which was the big thing. If she wasn't head down, then they were not even going to let me try. And then C was vertex and B was vertex breech and C was transverse. There we go. I can get the technical terms. And then when they ended up inducing, A and B had flipped head down and C was still sitting sideways at the top. So they were kind of like a triangle is the only way I can describe it. He ended up flipping head down and then they couldn't get him out because he had his hands over his head. So they ended up pulling him out by his feet.
Wow. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, we were really lucky. He was born actually not breathing because he was put in distress when they pulled him out. He just went on oxygen and he was perfectly fine. So we really lucked out.
So you have a very strong constitution. And yes, of course, it's nice to be able to get the help and support. But you were just powering through anyway.
Pretty much. And when they, at my 34-week appointment, they were kind of like, well, we know you're determined to do this, so we're going to let you try. We had a lot of compromises and everything. But, my providers and myself, we worked as a team and they were willing to compromise. So I was. And in the end, it all worked out. And
excellent. And your husband was on board with everything?
Yeah, sort of. Many reasons. He's kind of like, well, I think you should listen to doctors. And, but I guess I knew I could do it. I trusted myself. Even with breastfeeding, I trusted my body. I trusted that I could do it. So, because I was so confident, at some point he was like, okay, well, that's what you're going to do, then it's your body. I can't really tell you that you can't do it.
So he was full on support. That's wonderful. Taking a little break so I can share this info with you. I am really psyched to be able to share this next piece of news with you. My regular listeners are very familiar at this point with Momentum, the organization that I talk about on each show. You know the one that I say saved my life as a new mother, the organization that helped me find other mothers who were new at this whole mothering thing. They became my people. They helped me navigate that first year of motherhood and continued to mother me as I had more kids and my need for support through their toddler years and kindergarten years and elementary school years just kept being needed. I made lifelong friends and they were so helpful that I am doing all I can to continue to support the organization. I want Momentum to continue to thrive, and I want you, my All About Breastfeeding audience, to experience just some of what Momentum is all about. The ladies of Momentum have agreed to give my listeners a 14-day trial membership so you can see what this Mother Center thing is all about at no cost to you. Just hop on over to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/podcast. You will see a link from Momentum, it's in blue, and you just click it on and it will bring you to the page for you to sign up for your free trial. Honestly and truly, there's absolutely no cost to you. This is just a great opportunity for you to enjoy the discussion groups and the blogs and webinars and educational pieces that are available for free for you. I will have a link to this in the show notes. And now, back to the show. Tell me what would you say to other mothers who are pregnant with multiples? Let's just go with 2 or 3 for right now. And their concerns with thinking that they won't, how could they possibly make enough milk for their babies? What are some of the things that you've learned about your body and how mothers make milk?
The biggest thing that I told myself, and that I would tell their moms is it's supply and demand. It's a commitment. It's not going to be just, it's a commitment. It's hard work. But as long as you're feeding, as long as you're trying to put your babies to breast or you're trying to pump, when you tell your body, hey, I need this milk, it's going to make it. And I read something on the internet one time, and it was about wet nurses back in the day and how sometimes they would feed, 6, 7, 8 babies. And I thought, yeah, if they can feed all these babies, certainly I can feed 3, right? So that was kind of my mantra. Like, it's supply and demand. When I demand, I have to trust that my body's going to supply. So, I try not to psych myself out, and hopefully other moms, don't psych themselves out, and they just trust their bodies, trust their babies, and, go with it.
And I like what you said before in that you had the initial struggles in the hospital. Now it sounds like you had probably some confidence level with regards to having pumped milk and having stored it so that if your babies were not getting enough, that you could always give them still your milk, that they didn't have to get formula if they needed to supplement. But it also sounds like there was part of you that just said, let me just do what I need to do to feed the babies so that I could get home and my own space and then maybe get help and support.
Right.
And then I could get down to business and really working with breastfeeding the babies.
Right. Because, when you're in the hospital, it's stressful. They're attached to wires. You've got nurses coming in. And it's just, once you're at home, you can sort of relax and kind of do what you need to do. It's hard to tell, and I remember the nurses, they were in the NICU, and I got to stay with them the whole time, thankfully. So I'd be sleeping, and they wouldn't, they would want me to sleep because they knew I needed rest, and, so they just wouldn't wake me up for feeds. They had the best intentions, but, at the time, I needed to wake up to feed or pump. So once we got home, I was sort of able to set my alarms, which you can't really do in a hospital because, then you wake babies and nurses get mad. Once you're home, it's just sort of like, you can kind of relax, take a deep breath and do what you need to do. And it's so much harder in the hospital. And that was why I wanted out.
You want out. You just want to get home. So tell me, who helped you at home to coordinate taking care of not only your other kids, but in breastfeeding the triplets, because it's very awkward. Like you use the terms like you have to do some ninja moves, but you're trying to put one baby on, you're trying to put another baby on, you're sitting on the couch, you're getting all the pillows. So I'm trying to get the audience to try and picture how it is you're actually manipulating all this. So I imagine that you had some other adult help with you.
Yes. When we initially found out that we were pregnant, the triplets, they tell you these horror stories about bed rest and, in the hospital. So we actually moved in with my grandma. So that way, just in case, we had a backup plan. So once the triplets arrived, obviously we were still with her. And she was really invaluable as far as caring for my older girls. I kind of focused on the triplets and coordinating that, and she sort of helped me with my older 2 girls, getting them up, making sure that they got breakfast. And now, once we didn't have her anymore, it certainly complicated things, but it was sometimes you just, I'd walk around and be making eggs with, breastfeeding a baby. Logistically, it probably would have been doable without her. It just would have been a lot more multitasking, whereas she sort of let me kind of relax a little bit and just not be so frazzled trying to do everything. And my husband at night, he works during the day, but at nighttime he was really good. Sometimes it would be all 3 babies awake and screaming at me. And, at that point it's sort of like, okay, well, there's 3 of you crying at me. I only have 2 breasts. What are we going to do? Sometimes that meant me, nursing 2 and 1 was on my chest and I'm just trying to, calm it down. And, while it patiently has to wait for its siblings to eat. And other times that meant, my husband getting up and walking and rocking. And, that way when the other 2 were done, I didn't have too much help as far as, getting the babies. I had a glider, and then they slept in a pack and play all together while they were still swaddled. So I could reach them, like I would kind of grab them with one hand, or I would get two of them in my arms, and then I would sit down, and then I would latch one and latch the other. But I had so much support from both my husband and my grandma in the house, physically there to help support me, that it really helped me be more relaxed, be less stressed about life. And like I said, once she was not there anymore, it was certainly, I felt like more frazzled, and oh my gosh, like I have to feed the babies, but then I have to make something, make like real food for my older girls. I was lucky, and hopefully I know it's not everyone out there probably has the support that I have, but I hope they can find somebody, even if it's just for a couple of days, to come in and even make them meals, just bring them a meal. They don't have to cook.
To not have to worry about different is very huge for a mom of a newborn. And, you have a few other kiddos in the house. That's an extremely valuable commodity dinner.
Yeah, it's just amazing what and I'm part of a local twins group. They brought meals for us, a couple nights, and it was just so nice to not have to worry about it, and just kind of sit down, eat. And cooking, I don't enjoy cooking. I know some people do, but I'm not one of those people. So for me, it was especially appreciative because I didn't have to cook it. So
right. Yeah, and how nice it is just to know that you have a community of other people supporting you. That alone is just really nice.
Yes, exactly. And it's, it does take a weight off your shoulders, it's just, I think that's so important because, when you are nursing, when you do have a newborn, stress can really affect so many things that we don't realize. So any little thing to help decrease your stress is just going to make it so much better. And it can be the smallest thing, even somebody just calling, and asking how you're doing. But it's so important. It's more important than I think we realize.
Absolutely. So, for people who don't fully understand the way that breastfeeding works, tell us a little bit about how your journey has been with regards to, in the very early weeks, babies are breastfeeding they're breastfeeding very frequently. And then if you have triplets, it seems like that's just what you're doing a majority of the time that you're awake. But we also know that babies begin to spread out their feedings, and then after a while they start getting solid foods. So kind of give me a rundown of about when you felt like, if you remember about how old they were when you felt like they were now spreading it out a little bit, that you had several hours in between, and then how that's evolved and where you are in your breastfeeding journey now, and about how frequently your babies are feeding now.
Well, I think probably right around 4 months is when they started. And I think that might be long just because, I think with the three of them sharing, I can't even remember with my older two. Around 4 or 5 months, they started going like 3 or 4 hours. About 6 months, they started stretching out more at night. So, for that first 6 months, I felt like they ate a lot more at night than they did during the day, which, I think is pretty common for a breastfed baby. But it took mine a little bit longer to stretch out, and I think that's just because they were sharing. And then about 10 months, mine were they were a little bit behind. So we started solids later than you normally would. But even introducing solids, I think we started that about 8 months. And it was nice because I could leave the house and I could give somebody, like some food and be like, here, can you feed them? Anytime that they got solid foods, I would sit on the floor and I would pump while they were eating their solid food.
So you're still busy while they're eating.
Yeah, even when they were, even when they started solids, I was still breastfeeding. Like I had my little strapless, hands-free nursing bra, and I'd hook up my pump, and I'd put them in their little chairs, and I would pump while they ate their, their mashed food and whatnot. And so it was always something. But there were, and like if I would get in the car, I'd hook up my pump and just anything to keep my supply up. And did I need to do that? I don't know. Probably not, but it helped me feel better.
So you were pumping because you needed to keep your supply up, and or because you wanted to store some milk in a bottle for times when you needed to be away from them.
Right. And that's, right around Christmas, I actually developed mastitis. I got super lazy being with family. I was just pumping and doing a lot of bottles. Well, pumping just isn't the same as baby. So right after Christmas, I got mastitis, and my supply just took a tank. And I actually have a friend who very, very unfortunately lost her baby at delivery. And so she pumped for me and donated so much milk. And I kept it in my freezer just in case. So when I had mastitis, I supplemented with, her donor milk because I wasn't producing enough, and I was pumping and trying to feed them as much as possible. And it took about 3 to 4 weeks for my supply to come back. I went from making roughly 16 ounces per feeding to about 8 ounces per feeding. 8 ounces just doesn't adequately feed 3 babies.
So at that time, did you recognize that the excessive pumping and maybe getting off a schedule and not having the babies be the one to really get in there to your breast and milk you really well, that was affecting the milk removal and that caused mastitis?
Oh, absolutely. And it was, I thought, oh, it'll be fine. Like, I'll just make sure that I pump, as long as they're eating and, any chance I get. And it just, and I don't know if it's different from having 1 or 3, but, my pump was never as efficient as, as nursing. While we were traveling and visiting family, I would try to nurse as much as possible, but we were traveling 3 hours to go visit family, and it was easier and more convenient to pump. And looking back, I wish I would have just stuck with it and nursed them. Because the mastitis wasn't worth it.
Hindsight is everything. And yes, and people don't really realize if they do get mastitis, how painful it's going to be and how much it really affects their milk supply. And interestingly enough, I've been doing this work so long, statistically speaking, the rate of mastitis, even amongst moms that breastfeeding is going really well, goes way up from like a week or 2 before Thanksgiving until a couple of weeks after the new year. It like skyrockets. And a lot of that, just common sense, has to do with moms being more busier, maybe delaying feedings, shortening feedings, maybe doing more pumping. Maybe and if they're pumping, maybe they're not pumping as frequently as they need to. So I always say the breasts don't like a lot of changes.
No.
And you're right in that for a fair amount of moms, the pumps are not nearly as efficient as a baby that's breastfeeding well. So you're saying, okay, so I did all this kind of stuff during the holiday season, but now back to the basics, back to putting the babies to the breast for most of their feedings rather than relying on the pump.
Right. And that was, and I just would, I would nurse them basically until they were just kind of like getting frustrated. Once they started getting frustrated, then we had like small 2-ounce bottles. So I never, I'd give them like an ounce or 2. And as long as, if they were satisfied with that, then we would stop. Or if they still kind of acted hungry, I might give them another ounce or another half an ounce. I was just really careful because I know, and that was my big thing with wanting to use donor milk, is with formula, I think it's easier to overfeed, because babies need more formula than they do breast milk. The compounds are different. So I just didn't want to get into a habit of them expecting 8 ounces at every feed, or, because that's not what they were taking before.
Right.
Knowing what they were taking before when I was, feeding them and they were doing well, really kind of helped, it gave me a good starting point with, okay, normally at, when they're nursing from me, they're getting anywhere from 3 to 6 or from 4 to 6 ounces. So, I was really careful about not overfeeding them so that they didn't expect that, because I knew if I overfed them, then that would just be the end of it.
Right. And you have all this knowledge now because this isn't not your first baby, your first breastfeeding experience, but as first-time moms, lots of us just don't know that.
Yeah, and I think some of it was prior knowledge, but a lot of the stuff that I've learned this time, I honestly learned from just being more involved with my lactation consultant. And I had to be more involved because, there were 3 of them and there were, doctor concerns. Even with the first, there was still a lot of stuff that I had to learn, and I just never really realized, oh, that's what I need to do.
So tell me how important your lactation consultant was to your experience.
I couldn't put a price tag on her. Like, she is worth her weight in gold and then some. When I had them, they sent another lactation consultant in, and, she, the next day she came in and, I said, look, this is what they're saying. And she's like, okay, well, don't worry about what they're saying. Like, this is what we're going to do. I mean, she just worked with me And, I mean, she fought for me. Like, she, when they, initially they told me I couldn't use my own breast milk to supplement with. And she went and talked to the head, like, neonatologist and was like, are you really going to tell this mom that she can't use her own milk? Like, it's her baby. But she fought for me every step of the way. And I mean, there were times when I would go to group and everybody else would leave and I would just stand there and cry. And, I was just like, at some, like, certain points, I was so overwhelmed and I was like, I'm so tired and I don't want to do this anymore. And, I mean, I was so close to giving up so many times. And she would just hug me and be like, what did you tell me when you first found out you were pregnant with these babies? You were going to breastfeed them. She never pushed me. And that, and she'd always tell me, if that's what you want to do, then do it. But why don't you go home and sleep on it and then decide what you want to do tomorrow? Because
there was probably a lot of times when she told you, why don't you go home and sleep on that one? Let's see tomorrow.
Yeah. And it just, and it made, and every time I go, okay, well, we're going to do it one more day. We'll see how I feel tomorrow. And then the next day, it was like, once I was able to even get a little bit of sleep or eat or, I was so consumed in that moment and being frustrated and overwhelmed and upset that I needed her to remind me, like, why did you start doing this? Why are you still, why are you doing this? Why are you making it a priority to breastfeed? Is it important to you? Yes, it is important to you. So you need to, step away from your emotions for a second, think about it tomorrow. And, and that's what I did. And she never forced me to keep going, but she was there when I needed her. And even if that meant crying on her shoulder, and she would give me tough love, sometimes she'd be like, you know what, you need to stop doing this and you need to put that baby on the boob more.
It's really wonderful, though, for you to share that and tell how important it is to have someone who really believes in what you're doing, be there to support you, and to actually be a lot of what you needed at different times. So sometimes we're your cheerleader. You mentioned sometimes there's tough love, and sometimes there's guidance to help tell you, you know what, now when you're feeling so overwhelmed and it's like your darkest, deepest moments, now is not the best time to make one of the most important decisions. Go home and sleep on it.
Right.
So it sounds like this lovely lactation consultant was everything that you needed and then a whole lot more. And I know you do, and I certainly appreciate her being there for you.
Yeah, she, I can honestly say that without her and her associate, at the breastfeeding support group, without them, I wouldn't have lasted as long as I did. They are weaned now. They weaned about a month and a half ago. Not by my choice. I wouldn't have made it. And I told her when I said, I'm going to make it to a year. That's my minimum goal. And she knew that, she knew that. And she encouraged me and she pushed me. And, like I said, she never forced me, but she pushed me when I needed it. And then once we hit a year, she said, okay, you're here, now what? And then it became, like a goal to get to 2. There were things out of, my control that I guess led to them weaning before I was ready. I always told myself, I'm going to get to a year and I'm not stopping. I don't care if I'm like crying every day. Like, that's my goal. That's what I want to do. And I felt, like I kind of had to do that for myself, but I was also doing what I knew was best for them. And sometimes what's best for your baby is different for everybody, but that was what was important to me. So I knew that I had to set goals for myself so that I had something to look forward to, something to look at. And that really helped me keep going. And then when I lost sight of that, I had people to kind of rope me back in and remind me what was so important to me. And we made it. Like, I remember the day that they turned 1, I just cried because I'm like, oh my gosh, like I did it. I did what so many people told me I couldn't do. And I've got healthy, chunky little babies. And I was proud of myself. And I think sometimes people, they say to me, well, do you think you're better than me? No, absolutely not. What's important to you is different than what's important to me. But this was important to me. So I'm proud of myself. Like, this is like, if you go run a marathon, and that's kind of what I compare breastfeeding to, like some people like to go run marathons. I don't enjoy that, but I don't, I don't think anyone's better than me per se because they ran a marathon. That's just not important to me. Breastfeeding was important to me. And by reaching that year mark, I finished my marathon.
It's not about what they think. It's about what, your goals and what you wanted to accomplish. And that's really all that counts, right?
Right, exactly. And that's, it's so hard sometimes to understand that, what other people say or what other people think, that's not what it's about. It's about you, and, you kind of just got to stay true to yourself and know what you want and do it.
Well, I think you've done fabulous. What I'd like to know is, when all is said and done, is there any specific words of wisdom that you could share with a mom who's struggling with breastfeeding at all and feeling like they're overwhelmed? And just like the lactation consultant was with you when you were feeling that, what words of wisdom could you share with another mom to keep her going another day or two before she makes a decision to give up if she's really struggling? And you know what, I say give up, but I don't even really mean that in that sense, because give up makes it sound like you did something wrong or that you failed, and I certainly wouldn't want any mother to think that. But I mean that if they just feel like they can't go on just one more day, what's something that you would tell them to help give them the confidence or cheer them on, or to bring them to a point where they're just have a little more sleep and they're not making, like I said, an important decision at a very dark moment, to at least bring them to that moment in their day where they feel somewhat more rested and can think objectively before making a decision?
I guess the biggest thing is, I've had a lot of moms come to me and they're, they are at their wits' end. And unfortunately, all I can do is, help encourage them. It's going to be okay, and it's going to get easier. It's so hard when you're in that moment. You're doing a good job. If you stop breastfeeding today, you gave your baby, however long, the best thing for them. And that's important. Whether you breastfeed for, a week, a month, a year, it doesn't matter. You tried. You did a good job. You're doing a good job. And I don't think that moms hear that enough. It's really important for them to hear that. And just from there, it gets easier.
You know what? You're absolutely right, and that's totally how I feel, that they're doing a good job. And frequently, whether it's self-inflicted words or what other people say to moms when they're struggling, and or if they should stop breastfeeding altogether or move to pumping and bottle feeding, there's this sense, quote unquote, failure, which I totally do not. Those aren't words that I would use. But others might use it for them, or they might say it to themselves. But you're absolutely right. What we really want mothers to know is that you're doing a good job. You're doing a good job. You're doing the best that you can. So I really appreciate that you're sharing that, and because it means a lot from someone who's had a lot of struggles and you did succeed, to still be able to say to the next mom that whatever it is that you're doing, however long as you go, you're doing a good job. So I really thank you a lot for that, Brittany. What I'd like to do now is, I know like you have 5 kids, so I don't know if you're in your photography business now. I know you're a photographer. I didn't know if you wanted to share any of that personal or business information with us.
I do a lot of families and whatnot. It's my business name is real simple. It's Yankowski Photography. My experience as being a mom has really led me more into wanting to do maternity and birth and breastfeeding. And I know for me, having pictures, of me nursing my children was really, really important to kind of look back on, and just brings back nice memories. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm, wanting to head in the next year as my kids get older, and maybe next 2 years. I'm really hoping to kind of take what I've learned about, birth and breastfeeding and do something with my photography with it. Cause it's, I'm so passionate about those areas, and I'm passionate about photography. So I'm working on some projects with breastfeeding moms right now, and I'm going to help out our lactation consultants to get some more funding, for their group and whatnot. And so I'm excited to see what the future holds and how I can kind of merge birth and breastfeeding and photography.
Wow, you'll have to let me know. And do you have a blog that you're currently posting on?
Yeah, I was a lot more active when I was pregnant. I had a lot more time. Our blog is called Triplets, and a lot of people ask me, what does that even mean. When I was pregnant, I would have other moms say, well, you don't know crazy until you have triplets. So there was just so much, so much that I learned. And it was like, until you have triplets, you don't know this. So that was kind of the basis of my blog. And a lot of it was just kind of updating on our birth journey and, getting the babies here safely, and initially when they were born, I focused a lot on, having birth choice and, it's your body. And now I've sort of shifted, I still talk about that with moms who want to talk about it, but I've sort of shifted more to breastfeeding and multiples and, being that support. We have a Facebook page called the Yankowski Triplets, and I share breastfeeding things, and I recently posted a blog about what I've learned while breastfeeding, and I tried to answer a lot of the commonly asked questions that I get. And, I get a lot of messages. I try to reply to them as much as I can to help other moms, because I know sometimes they just don't have support anywhere else. So if I can be available to be their support, I'm so honored. So I try really hard to answer everyone's questions and help them as much as I can.
There's nothing like getting some thoughts and suggestions and advice from a mom who's been there, done that.
When I first, I didn't know if I could breastfeed, triplets. So I went online, I looked for resources. I found another blog called Growing Up Triplets. And, she was sort of like a natural parent. She breastfed her triplets and everything. And so reading other moms who did it really helped encourage me to do it. So that was kind of my motivation was, they motivated me to do it by showing me that they could. So that's why, I felt really compelled to share my story. So maybe if somebody came across, they could say, oh, well, she did it, so can I.
By doing that, you help one other mom, and that one other mom then helps 3 other moms, and so on and so forth. So the help spreads a lot more than the women that you directly touch. Mm-hmm. It goes much far reaching. So we're coming to the close of our time. So I wanted to know, if someone did want to touch base with you, how could they best contact you?
Probably the best way to contact me would be through our Facebook page. And, like I said, I do try to respond to messages. And there's been a couple moms that I've connected with through my personal Facebook or helped get them in touch with, appropriate groups. If another mom was expecting triplets, there are support groups for triplets specifically. But yeah, people who reach out to me through our Facebook page, it kind of opens communication. And that way it's sort of, for a while I was getting a whole lot of friend requests on my personal page. And, I do try to keep some of our life somewhat private, because you never know who's on the internet.
Well, that plus also time-wise, so everybody here, has to know that you're a mom of 5 kids, and yes. Probably even to respond to 2 or 3 messages a day is a lot for you, because frequently it's not just a one-word answer. Okay, so if you want to reach Brittany, you can just do a search on Facebook for Yankowski Triplets. And on that note, I'm going to thank you so much for being on the show, and really basically to letting the world know that breastfeeding triplets is more than just a possibility, that you can do it. They not only survive, but they thrive. And you went a lot longer than a year. You've done fabulous. Like you said, you had chunky babies. So I'm thrilled that you came on to All About Breastfeeding to share all that info with us. Thank you so much, Brittany.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so honored.
Before I end, I have 3 topics I would like to end this show with. The first item is, I love getting email and reviews from you, my listeners. The next best thing for me to do would be able to get to talk to some of my listeners and hear your feedback about the show. What are you liking? What do you want more of? Your thoughts on what I can do to make the show better, and any additional thoughts you have. If talking to me is something you would like to do, just go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/contact. Fill out the form and just put the word feedback in the comments section, and I will send you an email so we can work out a time to chat. The second item is an offer to pregnant moms. There's no reason for you to have unanswered worries or concerns about breastfeeding. Many have said that you would have liked to have the opportunity to talk to me before your baby was born, so you could go over certain things that may have been troubling you about breastfeeding. Questions about maybe your health, medication you're taking, maybe breast surgery you had, your nipple anatomy. Perhaps you have fears or anxiety about breastfeeding and you feel it would be helpful to talk it out before your baby's born. Some mothers just have a bunch of questions that could not be answered in your regular breastfeeding class because of time or privacy. Talking through things can help you clear the way emotionally for an excellent start with breastfeeding. If you would like to Skype me, all you need to do is go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/Skype to schedule your online prenatal consult. The third and last item is a reminder about my fabulous online breastfeeding mothers group for you to join. We are meeting for 8 Wednesdays starting May 11th. There is only room for 10 moms, so if you want to join, check out allaboutbreastfeeding.biz support for details about the group, what we're doing, and the dates, and how you can get involved. Until the next show, this is Lori saying goodbye.